Hi everyone. Welcome to week 6, Ecology and Society. This week we're talking about the adaptive cycle, panarchy, and the types of phases or stages that social ecological systems go through. Um, First of all, a note: my apologies here. You're seeing, I guess, a full screen with next slides and all the slides there in the bottom banner. This is the first time I've attempted to record without a dual screen setup, and apparently this is the format that it records in. Okay, so I thought the reading briefly touched on this, but this is some important kind of background information that I thought was just really interesting. The idea that a lot of the initial thinking on this might have come from economic thinking. So there's this quote here: the opening up of new markets, foreign or domestic, and the organizational development from the craft shop to such concerns as U.S. Steel illustrate the same process of industrial mutation, if I may use that biological term, that incessantly revolutionizes the economic structure from within, incessantly destroying the old one, incessantly creating a new one. This process of creative destruction is the essential fact about capitalism. So that quote, in and of itself, kind of encapsulates this idea of these cycles, economic stability, and then almost forces destroying that stability through processes of creative destruction. So essentially thinking about social ecological systems, they are dynamic and they move through different phases. Systems are creatively destructed and new systems emerge. So that's a general summary of what we'll be talking about here today. So some key resilience concepts here. The adaptive cycle. I presented this slide in, I believe, week 3. Social ecological systems are always changing, so it's really understanding that change that's important. The adaptive cycle outlines 4 phases: growth, conservation, release, and reorganization. Importantly, these are organized into kind of 2 loops. The first is the for loop. The for loop includes the exploitation phase and the conservation phase. Most systems spend most of their time in the for loop. In sort of directly correlated, most research, management, policy development is in the for loop as well. Change in the for loop is often incremental and predictable. So our thinking of these systems traditionally is moving incrementally, or changing in predictable ways, is based on this for loop sort of stages. These for loop stages. The for loop is characterized by the accumulation of capital, whether that's social capital, natural capital, by stability and conservation, and it's a mode that is essential for system well-being to increase. We also have the back loop here, right? So the cycle goes through these stages of exploitation, conservation, then release, the omega stage, and reorganization, the alpha stage. The release and reorganization is considered the back loop. It's only very recently, and in part through this resilience thinking, resilience research, that the back loop has gained recognition and sort of the enormous importance and potential that exist in these loops. The back loop is characterized by uncertainty, novelty, experimentation. And the back loop is the time of the greatest potential for the initiation of either destructive or creative change in the system. It's the time when human actions, either intentionally and thoughtfully or spontaneous and recklessly, can have the biggest impact. So when we think about transformation as a concept and the ability for humans or human systems or adaptive governance to guide systems through transformation. We're thinking about transformation through that back loop cycle. So let's talk about each of these concepts sort of in turn. The first phase, the exploitation phase, is also known as the R phase. It's the phase of the most rapid growth, so the maximum rate of growth occurs in this phase. It's the phase where new opportunities are exploited, available resources are exploited. The system components are generally weakly interconnected, and the internal state is weakly regulated. So weakly connected components and a weakly regulated system. The system, or in this stage, it adapts well to external variability, adapts well to uncertainty. And so an example here is your classic example, right, is invasive, terrestrial invasive species. So one disturbance that is a really big consideration, particularly in national forest system lands, is new road construction. So you see there that picture of sort of a road or a highway road. You see that disturbance creates a lot of variability, a lot of uncertainty. Basically creates new opportunities for those resources, for that freshly disturbed soil to be exploited by terrestrial noxious species. The other example, thinking in the sort of the human realm, is startups. So business startups really thrive in this rapid growth phase. The next phase here is the K phase, or the conservation phase. The K phase is essentially the maximum population size. This is often what we think of when we think of carrying capacity. What is the carrying capacity of a system, or the climax state of an ecosystem? In this phase, energy gets stored, capital is developed, capital is stored in systems, materials accumulate. In this phase, connections increase. So really, in my mind, I always think about social networks, right? The connections between actors are increased. But also thinking about social ecological feedbacks. So those connections, those feedback loops through the system are increased, they're enhanced, they're becoming a little bit more rigid. Specialists thrive in this phase, so specialists who reduce variability, specialists that create symbiotic interactions with each other to reinforce existing relationships. The classic example here is the old growth forest, very established, very high stored capital phase, and then kind of multinational corporations. Efficiency is really important. The system has become efficient, doesn't like new novelty, doesn't like uncertainty, and it's sort of built these feedbacks based on being efficient with inputs and outputs. The next phase here, the omega phase, we're sort of entering into the back loop. The omega phase is known as the release phase. This is the breaking apart of or reinforcing of interactions. The breaking apart of reinforcing interactions. The release phase is generally driven by a disturbance or shock that exceeds the system resilience. So connections break apart, regulatory controls are broken. The natural social economic capital escapes the system. Uncertainty and chaos reigns. So there's really no stable equilibrium. Thinking about sort of the phase states and resilience. No stable equilibrium, no attractor, no basin of attraction. So the system is just in sort of chaos right here. Examples here include sort of high severity, high extent wildfires, droughts, disease, economic recession. Think about the financial collapse in 2008? That seems like so long ago. Wars, disruptive technology, also sort of create this release phase. Some other key resilience concepts: adaptive cycle. Well, sticking with the adaptive cycle, the reorganization phase. In this phase, reorganization and renewal occurs. Novelty thrives. Novel organization of components in the system happens. In this phase, small chance events can really shape system directions. This is a really great example of a general sort of chaos theory metaphor where a butterfly flaps its wings and creates large hurricane disturbance hundreds of thousands of miles away. So small chance events can shape the system. New inventions, new collaborations, novel ecosystems that are formed, those are all examples of the reorganization phase. One sort of example that Photo is alluding to is in Colorado, in a lot of the other Rocky Mountain West, the bark beetle epidemic has killed a lot of the lodgepole pine. What we're seeing, and so that's sort of the release phase, what we're seeing in this reorganization phase is aspen sort of establishing itself and really thriving in these systems where before it didn't exist. It certainly did in certain places, but not as predominantly throughout the forest as it is becoming now. So some other key resilience concepts here. Panarchy. The focus of the two videos that were sort of assigned or put up there this week are about panarchy. And this really is a term that's coined to describe the cross-scale and dynamic character of interactions between human and natural systems. So really thinking about the coupled nature of human-natural systems. Panarchy really highlights the multi-scale nature of these systems, the multi-scale structure and dynamics of the system. And the structure and dynamics of the system at each scale is driven by a small set of processes that are linked to a set of hierarchies. So panarchy really came out of the ecological theories that were already thinking about hierarchical systems, top-down and bottom-up sort of drivers of processes, but then realizing that those hierarchies are embedded at each scale within adaptive cycles of their own. So linking the adaptive cycles to hierarchies at sort of lower and higher scales. That really emphasizes this point of cross-scale effects. Cross-scale effects are, definitionally just effects of one scale on another. Think of top-down cross-scale effects such as climate change or a federal subsidy program to keep a certain type of agriculture in production, or think about the CRP program, crop production program, a certain type of agriculture out of production that's coming from the federal government, sort of a top-down effect that starts nationally, federally, then affects the farm level scale. You can think of bottom-up effects. The book gives an example of the forest patch change. Really starts at a scale smaller than that. Sort of a tree needle, a very small scale that can lead to change throughout the whole system. And really, the most common reason for failures in command and control management are cross-scale effects. It's so hard to account for, plan for, manage for these cross-scale dynamics that we often don't understand very well. One of the exam questions, was simply, I think it was a true-false question about the ability to optimize the system. Here's a little bit more justification for that. Yes, maybe on short time frames and at certain specific scales, you can optimize the system. But eventually, over long time scales, these cross-scale effects make optimizing any sort of production very difficult. And finally here, the case study, I'm not going to discuss the case study too much, but the case study highlights one very important dimension of sort of social ecological systems thinking, of resilience thinking, and that's scenario planning. With scenario planning, we start with bringing together the best available information on conditions of the region, biophysical information, social information, economic information, identifying the key uncertainties, key vulnerabilities, the sources of resilience in the system. Involving and engaging local residents is always really important in scenario planning. What are the hopes, fears of people for the future of the region? What do they want to see? How are values integrated into the system and the direction sort of the region, of the landscape? And then through that process to develop scenarios of several possible futures. And one interesting side note is there's the Texas A&M and the University of Texas recently together had a NSF grant funded looking at sort of water along the I-35 corridor in Texas. One of the key funded dimensions of this research was scenario planning. I believe that the Texas Water Research Institute, TWRI Resource Institute, is leading that scenario planning effort. So what's up for the rest of this week? We'll make sure you do the readings. As always, the wiki for the undergraduates is up and posted. There will be a quiz this week. It'll be posted on Thursday morning, and it'll be open until Sunday at midnight. And today I did provide, on Tuesday, handouts with more information on the project and the paper. Please let me know if you have any questions about that. And have a great week. We'll talk with you again soon.